If you're convinced the S-Corp Tax Election could save you FICA taxes, or if you've already made the S-Corp Tax Election, I'm afraid your work is not done yet. There is a bunch of additional administrative burden that you will have to navigate once you've made the S-Corp Tax Election, and even some additional expenses that you will have to incur. Today, we are going to break that down and discuss the 8 things I want every therapist to know about the S-Corp Tax Election. Hey everyone, my name is Dave. I'm a financial planner and the founder of Turning Point Financial Life Planning, where I use the tools of financial planning to help therapists grow their impact and build lives that they love. If you're new here, please be sure and click on that subscribe button. So today we are going to talk about the S-Corp Tax Election and whether that might be right for you. Hopefully you've already seen my first post on S-Corps where I walk through how you can determine whether the S-Corp might save you money, and I cover the single most important thing I want everyone to know about S-Corps, and that is that they save you money at tax time by reducing your FICA taxes, by reducing the amount of earnings you have that are assessed FICA taxes. And once you're convinced that this could be a smart tax-reducing move for you, unfortunately, your work is not done. S-Corps bring with them a lot of complexity that I want you to know about before diving into the S-Corp Tax Election, or if you've ever already made it, I want you to know these next 8 things we're going to cover to make sure that you keep your S-Corp tax elected business entity in good standing. So let's jump right in. Number 1, I want you to make sure that you have the right type of business entity. In most cases, you will need to form either an LLC or a corporation to make the S-Corp Tax Election. Depending on the state in which you live, that may be a professional LLC or a professional corporation. So be sure and check with your Secretary of State office to make sure that you've got the right business entity for the type of professional that you are. Number 2, reasonable compensation is a critical decision you need to be involved in. In the first video, I talked a lot about how there is this element of payroll, and we break your compensation into 2 different pieces. So you'll be getting payroll as someone who's made the S-Corp Tax Election, and you'll be getting a profit distribution. The profit distribution piece is the part of your compensation that will avoid FICA taxes. So the lower you set your salary, the lower you set your payroll, the lower you set your reasonable compensation, these are all synonyms, the greater your tax savings are going to be. And the IRS is smart to this tactic. So they want your compensation to be reasonable, and they are going to look to you to have data to support your decision. This is a complicated decision. I really suggest you work with a qualified tax professional, in most cases a CPA, to come up with this number. And in the description box below, I've included one good article that you can use to think about begin to think about how to set this amount and how to work with a professional. Number 3, you will need to have an accountable plan for your expenses and the home office deduction. This is a change from being a simple sole prop or a simple LLC. You will need to adopt what's known as an accountable plan. The plan isn't terribly complicated. It is just a policy and procedure document which outlines the requirements for the business reimbursing you as an individual for expenses that you may have incurred on behalf of the business. It will also be required for you to take the home office deduction. I have included also in the description box below a link to an article that can walk you through how to put in place an accountable plan. Number 4, you will need to run payroll at least quarterly. This is a big change from being a sole prop or a simple LLC. You as the business owner are also on payroll. You draw the salary, and you will need to You will need to hire or retain an outside vendor, someone like Gusto or ADP, to process payroll for you. This is really something you don't want to do yourself. And to maintain your S-Corp elected business entity in good standing, this is something you should do at least quarterly. Number 5, a corporate tax return will be required. If you haven't made the S-Corp Tax Election, you probably just file one income tax return for you as an individual or you as your household. Once you make the S-Corp Tax Election, that changes. The business entity itself will also file its own tax return on a form known as 1120S, and that return will be due a whole month earlier on March 15th. This is a complicated thing to put together. Another time, you almost certainly need to be working with a tax professional to prepare this return for you. Number 6, more formal bookkeeping requirements. When you operate your business as a sole prop or simple LLC, bookkeeping is important. I hope you have some formality around it, and it's less rigid. It's fairly low maintenance. Once you become a business entity that has made an S-Corp election, however, things get a little bit more formal. Because of that corporate return requirement that we just described, you will need to have bookkeeping that can support creation of more formal financial documents, or financial statements rather, such as the income statement and a balance sheet. While not always required, in most cases, you are going to need to have more formal bookkeeping in place to make sure that you can support creation of those types of financial statements. Number 7, the S-Corp Tax Election is going to reduce your Social Security benefits and your allowed SEP IRA contribution. Now, this is an important one that I see discussed all too infrequently. By reducing the amount of FICA taxes you owe, you are also reducing the amount of Social Security retirement benefits you will ultimately be eligible for. Now, this isn't a deal breaker. You can plan for this. And in fact, you can likely take your FICA tax savings today, invest them for retirement, watch those grow over time, and then take distributions from those retirement accounts that will be worth more than what you might have received from Social Security had you not made the S-Corp tax election. And of course, you need to do all those steps. There's some work and preparation involved. So not a deal breaker, but something to plan for. The other piece here is that by reducing FICA tax, you're going to be reducing the amount you can contribute to really any retirement plan. And the SEP IRA plan in particular is most dramatically impacted. There are some other plans that are also dramatically impacted, but SEPs are the most popular ones. This is one of the reasons I often prefer a solo or individual 401k relative to a SEP. Again, something you can plan for and navigate around, and something you do need to think through. Number 8, I want you to understand your state and local tax nuances. Now, when we think about the S-Corp tax election, most of the rules and legislation around this exist at the federal level. And because we live in a municipality, we live in individual states, those two other levels of government oftentimes will also assess taxes in different ways, and that can make the S-Corp tax election much less of a tax-saving maneuver. California, for example, Illinois, Texas, there are a bunch of other states that assess incremental taxes on your S-Corp in a way that's different from the federal level, and that makes the tax election of an S-Corp a little bit less attractive. Not a deal breaker, yet many times you just need to think through these details. Another good time to work with a professional. And I will say, if you live in the state of Tennessee or the city of New York, chances are an S-Corp is not going to be a real tax savings maneuver for you because of the way your local governments tax earnings. So be sure to think that all through. So we've covered a lot of information here. At the end of the day, is an S-Corp tax election right for you? The answer, as with all things in personal finance and private practice finance, is that it's going to depend. It depends on how you run your business, what level of administrative burden you're willing to take on to save some money at tax time, and it matters how much earnings you're making consistently year to year in your business. In general, while it's tough to come up with a good rule of thumb, once you are making $60,000 or more in profit from your business each year, that's when it begins to make sense to investigate the S-Corp tax election. That's when it begins to save you some money. And the more your earnings grow beyond that $60,000 threshold, the greater your savings could be. Now, there are some professionals who would suggest the threshold is much lower, maybe even as low as $30,000 in profit a year or $40,000 of profit. And that can be true depending on how you implement the election and where you live, because how you are taxed at the municipal and state level can impact what that threshold amount is. For most people, I think above 60K is about where you need to be. All right, folks, that is it for this week's video. Yikes, we covered a lot of ground, and really out of necessity. S-Corps are very complicated, and I want you to understand the complexity, some of the administrative burden and additional expenses that you take on when you make this tax election. Yes, it can save you a lot come tax times, and it can be a little bit of a headache, especially when you're first getting it off the ground, which is why I would really encourage you to work with a tax professional, work with a financial professional to help you really figure out whether the tax election is the right choice for you. As with all things in personal finance and private practice finance, There is no one-size-fits-all answer. It is really a personal decision that you have to make for yourself, recognizing what you want your business and what you want your life to look like. And of course, this is just one aspect of your financial life that you have to manage, which is why I've put together my free Finance Quick Start guide for therapists. Be sure and check out the description box below for a link to that free resource. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a tremendously great rest of your day. Take care.